Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Slam Harris podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Trent Doherty. Let's get this baby rolling. Okay, so we ended last time, episode 1, at the top of page 17. So we're going to pick up bottom of page 17. But let me say first that some people thought it was 100% appropriate that a book that is filled with ignorant hate was met with the back of my hand. And that's what this book is. It is a book of ignorant hate. It is a book of hate. You can just feel the vitriol dripping from every page, how much he cannot stand Christianity, which he utterly conflates with American late 20th century fundamentalism. It's just snide. The whole book is just written with a sneer and a curled lip. Now, also, he hardly ever quotes anybody or anything. He just makes these assertions without backing it up. He doesn't say, for example, here's like Ken Ham, or here's Henry Morris, or whoever. He's not quoting anybody. He's not drawing any distinctions. He just says this is what religion, or this is what Christians believe, and this is the concept of faith, etc., etc. So yeah, I was a little triggered. But others thought that I was a bit rough on poor Sam. And I think this is actually a little disrespectful to Sam Harris because he's supposed to be some kind of bad boy. He's supposed to be, a tough guy. He's supposed to be an intellectual. He's supposed to be, one of these guys from the intellectual dark web that's 100% capable of defending himself and debating and doing open forums and whatnot. Well, sorry, Sam. People seem to think that you're not up to the task here. So I'm kind of caught between two different possibilities here. I can continue to treat this the way it deserves to be treated, or I can at least sort of aim up, maybe not take the high S road, but take a higher road and try to contain myself a little bit. The last episode had a little bit of profanity in it. I'm going to try to completely eliminate that this episode. But yeah, I was for sure triggered because this stuff angers me. And you know what? Anger is the exact right emotion to have against hate-filled ignorance. It's like, yeah, that's right. This makes me angry. I was mad, very mad. I was insulted because it's insulting. Also, the epistemologist Thomas Reid, early modern, about the same time as Hume. We'll get his dates up there. Hume was 1711 to 1776. And so Reid was another Scottish non-skeptical philosopher from about the same time. And he had his view that the ridiculous deserved to be ridiculed. That in fact, ridicule was a sort of nature. It was nature's judgment on the ridiculous to be ridiculed. And so that he even thought there was something like a natural faculty of ridicule that when it saw the ridiculous, spontaneously ridiculed it so that people would know, yeah, don't pay any attention to this stuff. Now, Sam Harris is actually trying to piggyback off that. And this is actually something that happens. This is a standard kind of rhetoric. So because in a functioning society, only the ridiculous will be ridiculed, you can try to make something appear to be ridiculous just by ridiculing it. So this book is full of the ridicule of religion, even though he has no idea what he's talking about. He just doesn't get religion. He doesn't understand it. He has not made a study of the subject. He is just spewing. Okay? So the difference is that the things that he ridicules are easy to explain as non-ridiculous. Whereas the things that he's saying, he can't back up, which is one reason. What is one piece of evidence that he can't back it up? He doesn't. He doesn't give examples. He doesn't quote different Christians from different denominations or really anybody or this philosophy book, that philosophy book, this theology book, that theology book, this theologian, that thinker, that Christian philosopher, pretty much absent from the book. So that's how I feel about that. And now we'll pick up at the bottom, page 17, and continue the analysis. Okay. We're going to keep on slamming Sam. All right. So he's been talking about the dangers of moderate religion. of moderate believers. He's probably been accused of focusing on fundamentalists and ignoring moderate religious believers. So he's engaged in the sort of rhetorical trick of trying to show that moderates in religion are somehow off base. Okay, so that's where we've been. He continues, the first thing to observe about the moderates' retreat from scriptural literalism is that it draws its inspiration not from the scripture, but from cultural developments that have rendered many of God's utterances difficult to accept as written. Wrong. The biblical text, like most other religious texts, are ambiguous in certain respects. And sometimes you don't know which reading to take. And what can happen is further empirical research can determine which of a set of underdetermined meanings are the right one. In an article called A User's Guide to Fine-Tuning Arguments, or A User's Guide to Design Arguments, Ted Poston and I show how the scriptures and the Christian tradition are actually somewhat ambiguous with respect to how much direct control God exercises in the world. And we show that we give a model for how Christian theologians can learn from the natural sciences by allowing the natural sciences to distinguish between and determine among a group of underdetermined hypotheses about the meaning of Scripture. Okay, so you've got Scripture, you've got the plain sense, you read it and you think, okay, well, it could mean this, that, or the other, and I'm really not sure which it means. That's called underdetermination of message by the data. The data don't force a unique interpretation on the reader. And one of the ways such options can be narrowed is through empirical research, seeing what we learn when we look around in the world. And from the Hebrew scriptures to present, religious believers, at least in the Judeo-Christian tradition, have believed that God speaks through two books, the book of the Word and the book of the world. That's just built into the scriptural picture itself. In the medieval period, they called it the distinction between special revelation and natural revelation. The world provided natural revelation because God revealed himself through the book of the world, through as Paul says in Romans, the creator is known through his creation. The creation witnesses to the character of the creator. And so we can learn about God by studying nature. We can also potentially learn about nature by studying God, because it will generate certain predictions, and we can talk about that at a later time. But I urge the reader to take a look at this article called A User's Guide to Design Arguments. I think it came out in Cambridge University Press's journal, Religious Studies. I'll have the bibliographical data up here in the edit. But let me show you an example of how it is not the case that the biblical text has a literal reading of the biblical text is at odds with certain things in modern science. So let's go on and read some more of the accusations first. He says, going on, this is at the bottom of page 18, the doors leading out of scriptural literalism do not open from the inside. That is to say, you can't just look at scripture and determine what's to be taken literally and what's not. Wrong. You totally can. And we'll give examples of that. One example right off the top of my head is this. When you are reading the Genesis story and it talks about how the fruit was good and pleasing to the eye, and then after they sinned, it says their eyes were opened. Okay, now the ancient authors, whoever it be, were not stupid. They're not. It's like a few verses apart. Saw that the fruit was pleasing to the eye. Their eyes were opened after the eating of the fruit. They're not, just utterly ignorant. They're literate people. They're not going to embed some obvious absolute contradiction right there in the text. So what do you think? You think, oh, maybe the second eye-opening was a different kind of eye-opening. It was a spiritual eye-opening. It was a recognition. Their eyes were open to the nature of sin. So this claim that you can't distinguish between what's to be taken literally and what's to be taken metaphorically from the inside, from just the text of Scripture, wrong. But let's go on. The moderation we see among non-fundamentalists is not some sign that faith itself has evolved. It is, rather, the product of the many hammer blows of modernity that have exposed certain tenets of faith to doubt. Blah. Okay, so he says, here's an example of how that's not true. So I was not raised in the church, was not raised a Christian at all. Never darkened the door of a church until I was about 15 years old, actually. So I was reading, I knew some people were creationists, some people were evolutionists, some people thought God did evolution, some people were old earth creationists, young earth creationists. This would have been 86, I think I became a Christian, sometime around then. And even in 86, kind of at the height of fundamentalism in many ways, there were all these options on the table as to what day-age theory, gap theory, old earth creation, progressive creation, theistic evolution, at least two different types of young earth creation, the 4004 BC ultra traditional kind or the 6,000 to 8,000 year old kind. There were all these options on the table. It wasn't like presented to me like, oh, here's the absolute truth. And guess what? Scripture did not determine which of those options could be taken. They were all consistent with Scripture. They all had pros and cons. To determine or to try to select a view among those required sifting and weighing evidence. But in my case, for the witnessing anecdote here, the thing that's of interest is this: I ended up on the side of evolution, theistically guided evolution, God-guided evolution, not from reading science. When I read the science stuff, I was like, well, sure, that could have happened because of evolution. But frankly, the creationists have some pretty good explanations of those same things too. So just for example, off the top of my head, the prime evidence for evolution that's presented typically today in a biology classroom isn't paleontological stuff about fossils, because man, that stuff changes every 10 years. I've followed this since I was a kid, really, because our family had a National Geographic subscription, and I read Scientific American quite religiously, and there's been lots of shakeups in the sort of hominid family tree. So that's not usually presented as the main evidence, just because you got to be really subtle about that, and the data sometimes shifts. So it's typically done on a genetic basis. Okay, well, creationists kind of have a good point. They're like, okay, well, yeah, that would explain it maybe, but so would a common creator using the same methods and materials. That would also explain overlap, similarity of design, et cetera, et cetera. So may not be the case in every instance, but it's an example of how you've got some data, and yeah, there's a progressivist, gradualist explanation of it, but there's also a creationist explanation of it. And so that's going to leave a guy like me who comes to this not raised a Christian, not raised a naturalist. I have atheism, theism, just doesn't matter to me. I have not been raised with any inclinations or biases. And I feel completely open to all of these interpretations. So to a guy like me, I'm going to look at to me, the scientific evidence did not make the determination. What made the determination was reading Scripture. And I remember exactly where I was and when it was. It was at a lock-in. And I remember just reading these phrases and thinking, oh, okay, I think this is saying, this sort of made me come down on the side of more God using more secondary causes, God not acting as direct, not doing the fiat creation, but rather acting through the physical world. Okay, so I actually managed to find the original Bible that I read this in. This is like an 80s, student Bible, totally cheesy. Got the Christian radio station on the back there. I was a total, dyed-in-the-wool evangelical, man. It was actually kind of a fun time. Okay, so we're gonna do a little biblical exegesis here real quick. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. First thing to notice about that verse: when did God create the heavens and the earth? Here's when. In the beginning. When was that? Doesn't say. Notice that in this. Now, some young Earth creationists will say, "Oh, this is just a topical sentence." I don't think so. I think this is just starting you in a sense in media res. That you're starting at the starting point of Genesis is sometime after the creation of heavens and the earth, and our waters are already there. And then it goes into this new phase where God had let this mere matter, this mass, this potential exist, and now he's going to shape it. How long has passed between the beginning and now? Who knows? So we've got, verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and God saw the light was good, so on and so forth. Okay. Now here's where to pay attention to. Okay. Notice that in verse 6, we get, and God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate the water from the water above and the water below. Now, this isn't the creation of the water. There's no place in here where it says, let there be water. No. Water was created, quote, in the beginning. Genesis 1 and 2 tell us that. So water isn't created in the first, in the 7 days of ordering. They're really not, it shouldn't even really be called the creation story. It's the ordering story. The only reference to creation in Genesis is verses 1 and 2. The rest of it is not creating so much as it is ordering. And notice this again. This is in verse 9. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered in one place, and let the dry ground appear. So again, the earth here, the dry ground, it is appearing. It's not created on the second or third day. It is appearing. It was already there. When was it created? In the beginning. Genesis 1 and 2 tell us that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and the Spirit was hovering over the waters. Okay, so earth, water, sky, all this created in the beginning. And now in these 6 days, God is ordering things. He has taken the water that he's created in chaos, and he has separated the waters above from the water below. The water above being the sky. It's why the sky is blue. It's why it rains from there, right? And that was the picture the ancient Jews had. Is that like unscientific? No, it's actually pretty scientific. It's a good explanation for why the sky is blue and why rain falls out of the sky. Is it accurate? Well, in some senses, yeah, there's water in the atmosphere. Okay. There's not an ocean up there, but yeah, there's, in fact, the quantity of water in the atmosphere. That's actually an interesting question. I wonder what the total volume of water in the atmosphere is. I guarantee you, though, it's a lot. And I've got to find that out and see if you gather it together, how much it would be. Anyway, so that's the picture. You got water gathered above, water below, and then the water below's gathered together, and dry land appears. And it's going to appear around the water. Of course, what's this a picture of? It's a picture of the Mediterranean Sea and the land around it. They are describing the world as it appears to them to be. And then, and this is where we get into the evolutionary part, verse 11, then God said, let the land produce vegetation. The land. He doesn't say, let there be vegetation. He says, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, each according to the various kinds. And then this pattern is repeated a number of times, and you get back, so you get to verse 24, and God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. So both when God creates living beings, whether they be plant or animal, he doesn't say just let there be that thing. He said, let the land produce these things. And so I remember being at this lock-in, and all the responsibilities for the night were done, and I was just hanging out, having a little alone time. Most everybody else had fallen asleep. I was like, come on guys, let's play another round of volleyball. But everybody was kind of just chilling out, so I decided to chill out and read my Bible. And I was reading back then. That was when I first made that connection. I'm like, okay, all right, well, I think I've made up my mind. I think I'm going with God-guided evolution as the way the order and the and notice that the order of stuff comes in the creation narrative is right. You get light and darkness. You get sun and moons. You get planetary. Then you get, aquatic life, and then small mammalian life, and then human life. It really is a progression. And I noticed that, and I'm like, it just seemed like, okay, well, this has got evolution all over it. It's got evolution all over it. Even though, why does it say there was night and there was day? Why does it the day start with darkness and end with light? And the Jewish day to this day starts, the day starts dark and then ends in the morning. You're going from chaos to order, So to me, just reading Genesis 1 convinced me it had evolution and progression and secondary causation written all over it. Now, some of you out there will be young earth creationists and you'll disagree. That's fine. There are a lot of options out there consistent with Scripture. But just that whether I'm correct or not, it shows that Sam Harris's argument is false. Now, we need to back up for a second, and because I gave two quotes that connected to one another, but between them he sort of went off on a tangent and read this, quoted this piece of Scripture as something embarrassing to Christians and Jews. And so I want to read this because it's so rare for him to quote anything that we need to take a look at it. In this case, in fact, I think it's the first thing he's quoted, maybe. But this is like one of the worst passages of the Old Testament. Okay, so this is Deuteronomy 13, 7 through 11. If your brother, the son of your father, or of your mother, or your son or daughter, or the spouse whom you embrace, or your most intimate friend tries to secretly seduce you, saying, "Let us go and serve other gods, unknown to you or to your ancestors before you, or serving the gods of the people surrounding you, show him no pity. You must not spare him or conceal his guilt. No, you must kill him. Your hand must strike the first blow in putting him to death, and the hands of the rest of the people following. You must stone him to death, since he has tried to divert you from Yahweh your God." Okay, that's not nice. That is not nice at all. Now, the topic of these sorts of harsh Old Testament verses, that is a podcast of its own. But there's a couple of things to note here. One is that at this point in time, Israel is a theocracy. There's not elected leaders. There's not this is nation against nation. That's the way the world was. And if there is, so this has no implications whatsoever for modern governance. And remember, that's his reason why he said he was writing this. He was writing this because of 9/11. He says he made a big deal. I started this book on 9/12/2001. So the first thing to notice is that, okay, well, yeah, this isn't nice, but whatever we say about it, it has nothing to do with the, he really laments, as do I, the way the Republican Party and evangelicalism kind of became one for a while, or way too hand in hand. And that there are a lot of, for a long time, the neocons were a little bit hawkish. Nowadays, it's like Hillary Clinton's more hawkish than Republicans by far. And Pat Buchanan Republicans were protectionists, and they didn't want to go to war. So it's just, the political landscape was all over the place. But there was at least a group of Republicans who were both vocally Christian and fairly hawkish. So that's something that some people worry about. But what Sam Harris does throughout the book is he tries to connect that stuff to stuff like this from the Old Testament. And this doesn't work because Israel is a theocracy at this time. No way to import this into Christian worldview or modern context. If anybody advocates, there's this view called Christian dominionism, and this guy Rushdoony and these presuppositionalists and dominion theology and all this nonsense. It's garbage. And it's a totally, it's a minute development. I mean, so very, very few people. So much so that in 10 years of teaching at Baylor University, and having, tons of students, faculty, speakers, never once in 10 years. And it's like, the world's largest Baptist university. You'd think I'd run into one of them in 10 years, whether student or faculty or visitor or whatever. Never. Not once ever. Nor have I heard anybody say it at church, nor did I ever. The only place I ever met an actual one of these people, these Christian Reconstructionists, was in 1990 at Liberty University. And even there was like a few of them. And I don't know. This is fringe of fringe. And yet Sam Harris tends to make it out like this is the view, like this is the typical view. Garbage. So another thing to keep in mind here is the people of Israel had God's leadership confirmed by miraculous testimony. Now, I understand that the naturalists, the atheists, they don't want to believe that. That's fine. Don't believe it. But the people there believed it. And part and parcel of the story is that God had been intimately present to these people, so that leaving God wasn't just like maybe it would be for us if we haven't had some sort of deep religious experience, or God isn't manifesting himself to us by a pillar of cloud by day or pillar of fire by night, parting the Red Sea, stuff like that. For most of us, myself, I lack anything like that. But God, in this era, in this dispensation, God was much more intimately connected to the people of Israel. So leaving Yahweh and turning to a foreign God would have been a much more personal assault, much more personal act, and would have had to indicate a heart that had really become stone against God. And that makes a difference. And that it talks about the turning to the gods of the people around you. Man, you think this is harsh. This is like worlds ahead of some of the surrounding tribes and the like truly barbaric things they did. So somebody turning away from God at this time in this context would have been turning away from a God that made himself manifest to people quite intimately during a theocracy, turning to extremely barbaric activities. Now, that is a very different situation than what we have today. And so whatever we say about this, and we do have the New Testament where even though Jesus says he's not taking away from the law, you got to think about what the concept of the law really is there. And that concept of the ways in which Jesus did and did not get rid of the law is itself interesting and nuanced. He did fulfill, he talks about, I'm not going to take away a jot nor a tittle. That's because there the law represents the thing that he's coming to fulfill. And so he did not take away anything of that. But we can look back at the Old Testament and make a distinction between ceremonial laws, cleanliness laws, holiness laws, and see which ones are the ones that were the forecasters of Jesus, the ones that Jesus is fulfilling. And we can pretty easily tell which ones those are. And there's no way, so the New Testament just wipes out stuff like this. All right, so that gets us to so we're going to go back to the middle of page 19, where he continues on this same track. Religious moderation springs from the fact that even the least educated person among us simply knows more about certain matters than anyone did 2,000 years ago. That's actually not obviously true. People today are really ignorant about the world. It's unbelievable. Just go back to like the test that a 16-year-old Laura Ingalls had to take to get her teaching certification. I mean, it's like, you can't believe how no kid her age today could pass that. And you go back 2,000, 4,000 years ago, people actually knew more about the world and the way the world worked than we do now. People have lost a lot of knowledge of the way the world works, especially, guess what? Sex, life, death, the main things of the world. So this is not exactly true here, because, and even though you might say, oh, well, but the things he's talking about, the things are more relevant, like things about electricity. Well, guess what? What does the average person know about electricity? They know they flip a switch and a light comes on. They don't know how it works for the most part. And they don't know how magnetism works. They don't know about the strong and weak nuclear forces. all they know, they can't state, they don't know anything detailed about gravity. They just know things fall. Well, guess what? 4,500 years ago, they knew things fell when you dropped them. Okay, they knew about as much about gravity, the fundamental force of physics that is the one that we're most acquainted with on a daily basis, as we do. Okay, so this is he's not clear what he means here, and it's certainly not clear that he's right. That the much of the knowledge, he says, much of this knowledge is incompatible with Scripture. What is? He doesn't say. The only example he gives is, having heard something about the medical discoveries of the last 100 years, most of us no longer equate disease. Slow down and read this. Most of us no longer equate disease processes with sin or demonic possession. Well, guess what? Most people never have, Sam. Most people never have. You can see this in the text of the Scriptures itself, because Jesus or whoever wouldn't have to assert in certain cases that certain maladies were caused by sin or possession, if that was the assumption. Get it? It's not that hard. And Jesus himself specifically, where they're saying, was this man's blindness due to his own sin or his parents? Jesus says, wrong, neither. So yeah, some people would think that about some cases and not others, but it was absolutely not the case. There was never a time, nor at least not among Jews and Christians, and I don't think among Muslims, was there ever a time when the majority of people equated the disease process with sin or demonic possession. There might be animistic cultures in sub-Saharan Africa or Aboriginals or whatever that think that, but no group of Jews ever thought that. No group of Christians ever thought that. To the best of my knowledge, no group of Muslims ever thought that. So again, he's saying things that aren't true. And this would be so easy to verify. Yada, yada, yada. So he talks about, this weird stuff he says again. So he goes on, having learned about the known distance between objects in our universe. First of all, I highly doubt many people actually grasp that very well, but whatever. We know they're hundreds of thousands, if not millions of miles apart. Okay, probably the average, at least American, knows that. I hope, goodness gracious. But you wonder sometimes when you're watching Jaywalking with Jay Leno, having learned about the known distance between objects in our universe, most of us, about half of us actually, find the idea that the whole works was created 6,000 years ago with light from distant stars already in transit towards the Earth impossible to take seriously. Well, why would that be? Why would that be? There's nothing about the known distance between celestial objects that has anything to do in and of itself with when it was created. This is the old did Adam and Eve have belly buttons thing. So God has to face a choice at some point. Does he create a creation sort of like already ready to go? Does he, I mean, imagine that you, okay. Some of you are going to be old enough to remember this. I Dream of Jeannie. Okay. And she'd go, ink, and she'd blink her eyes and flip her ponytail and she could just make a meal appear. Okay. Now you got to ask yourself, okay, this meal, it's warm. It was created just hot and cooked. I mean, it's chicken, but the chicken in the meal was never running around in the farmyard. Okay. It had an appearance of age. Now, either God created things somewhat, at once, as they were. You okay, buddy? Yeah. I can get you some more tea later if you need it, bud. Poor sweet boy is having a cough. God either creates things essentially as they are at once, in which case, they're going to have an appearance of age. And it's this idea that, either there's a God who created the world or not. And let's have that debate, Sam. Let's have that debate all day long into the night until the sun rises, my friend, and I will own you up, down, side, inside and out. All right? Because you don't know what you're talking about. Let's have that debate about whether God exists. But if God exists, then he could create a world all at once with the appearance of age, and it would be no problem. There's nothing about the distance between celestial objects that means a hill of beans. I'm controlling myself. I'm triggered, but I'm controlling myself. So this is just silly nonsense. There's nothing about it that renders it not worth taking seriously. It's just one of those things like, you just got to think, okay, well, which way did God do it? And again, this is one of those examples of like, well, he could have created. So Augustine has this doctrine called the doctrine of rationes seminales, okay? The doctrine of seminal reasons or seminal causes. And he sort of, according to this view, God sort of creates a universe seed, and he lets that seed develop and unfold. So this beautiful, blooming flower of a world that we have, according to Augustine, unfolded from a seed, then a shoot, and then a shaft, and then a bud, and then a blossom, okay? But of course, that God didn't have to do it that way. God could have created the flower like that. And then, yeah, the flower would have had an appearance of age. But, and so imagine Sam Harris, Jeannie creates a flower, okay? And they, oh, but look at the distance between the bottom of the stem and the first leaf and the blossom. I mean, that took time. That couldn't happen in an instant. That can, whatever. I mean, either there's magic or there isn't. Well, let's have the argument about whether there's magic. But there's nothing about the distances involved that cast any aspersion whatsoever on the notion of magic. Just either there is magic or there isn't. That's just a separate debate. I see that we are at 37 minutes, and therefore I went over my 27-minute mark that I'd hoped to stop and take a pause at. So we're going to take a pause right now. And if you are sitting in the parking lot waiting for the segment to be over, we're going to pause it right now, and we'll be right back after a break. All right. All right, let's start the second half of the podcast, beginning at the top of page 20. So it is not that these texts have maintained their integrity over time. It is just that they have been effectively edited by our neglect of certain of their passages. No, wrong. It's that the passages can have multiple interpretations, and some people take one and some people take the other. And that's what he doesn't seem to get through his head. Most of what remains, the good parts, has been spared the same winnowing because we do not yet have a truly modern understanding of our ethical intuitions and our capacity for spiritual experience. So he thinks that the scriptures remain because they help us understand morality and spirituality. And here's where he starts to go off into his panty-waist atheism. If we better understood the workings of the human brain, we would undoubtedly discover lawful connections between our states of consciousness, our modes of conduct, and our various ways we use our attention. Why? What makes one person happier? Why to love is more conducive to happiness than hate? Gee, I wonder. All these things, he says, all these questions, these are ultimately questions for a mature science of the mind. Well, you better get with it, because the science of the mind right now really is lacking. But notice this too. Even if we got even if we discovered what he calls lawful connections between our states of consciousness and our modes of conduct, that wouldn't imply anything in and of itself about where our choices come from, whether our moral intuitions are correct, and it certainly wouldn't say anything at all about why we should abide by our moral intuitions. It would just establish a pattern. And that doesn't, so I don't know if I've mentioned before these studies where they had people read cartoons and judge their humor, and then they had a control group take a pencil and hold it in their mouth and read the same cartoons and then make judgments about their degree of humor. And guess what? Those who read with pencil in mouth thought the cartoons were funnier. Why is that? They're smiling. And try it. Try it right now. Try it at home. Even you atheists, even you mean old atheists, you sorry, sad, you sad Sam, ye sons of Sam that are so scornful. Just try it at home. Just give it a smile. you feel better. It just automatically happens. So you feel good and it makes you smile, but you also smile and it makes you feel good. Now, can people fake a smile? Yes, absolutely. Can you feel happy and not smile? Yes, absolutely. But there is a lawful connection between smiling and happiness. Happiness tends to lead to smiling. Smiling tends to lead to good feelings. Okay. So there's that push pull linkage there that is part of the mind body connection. Does that show, or even like, calm down, that doesn't go very far at all in determining the relationship between the mind and the brain. Particularly, it does not favor materialism about the mind over interactionist dualism. It would favor both of those views over some sort of radical dualism that suggested that there was really no, well, here's the dualism it would count as evidence against. One that predicted that there would be no lawful connections between our states of consciousness and our modes of conduct. And I tell you what, Sam, you know what? If you can find a version of mind-brain dualism that's a part of, give me a citation, buddy, because I don't think there is one. I literally think there is not a single version of dualism that is that radical that it would predict there's no lawful connection between our states of consciousness and our modes of conduct. But note, the only way, structurally speaking, in terms of the structure of the evidential relation, the only reason the observation of that kind of state could count as disconfirming of a theory is if the theory predicted the opposite. And in this case, what we're talking about is the observation of a law-like connection between our states of consciousness and our modes of conduct, which means that the theory to be not even refuted, but the theory to even have this observation count as evidence against it, once again, would have to have as a consequence of that theory that there would be no lawful connection between our states of consciousness and our modes of conduct. Find me a view like that, I'll reject it right along with you, because I am a interactionist, mind-body dualist. Mind and body are two different things. Mind and brain are two different things, but they are linked in a lawful manner. Great paper on this by Robert Merrihew Adams called Flavors, Colors, and God. And it's, I don't remember where it originally appeared, but it does appear in a collection called The Virtue of Faith. And it also appears, a version of it also appears by Richard Swinburne in the book 24 or So Arguments for God. If we ever develop such a science, of mind, most of our religious texts will be no more useful to mystics than they are to astronomers. And the part that I skipped over here was where he talks about how the science of mind would allow us to have an understanding of the sense of spirituality. So he thinks atheism he's really into this like spiritual atheism that I think is just weak. If you're going to be an atheist, go with Nietzsche, man. Own it. He says the problem that religious, so he goes off on these tangents and he comes back. So he's still talking. Remember, this section of chapter 1 is all about eliminating religious moderation from the intellectual map. Okay, that's what this section is about. The problem that religious moderation poses for all of us is that it does not permit anything very critical to be said about religious literalism. What? The idea that like you can't make fun of creationists is so utterly perplexing. It's like, yeah, there's, all these discussions on TV about like, oh, if there's one thing that's sacred that you can't make fun of, it's creationists. Give me a break. It's like, this is where is he coming from? Like, this is really, 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 really weird that anybody would even say this. We cannot say that fundamentalists are crazy because they're merely practicing their freedom of belief. What? Yeah, you can say they're crazy. And you can say, how do I know they're crazy? Well, they're practicing their freedom of belief and I'm seeing what they're believing. And this is a total non sequitur. We can't say that fundamentalists are crazy because they're merely practicing their freedom of belief. No, you can say, hey, this thing that you're freely practicing and have every right to do so, it's crazy. It's crazy. I think the things that Sam Harris thinks are crazy, but he's got every right to say it. He's got every right to believe it. I think, like these Christian Reconstructionists, I think they're crazy. I think Calvinism, crazy, like hardcore 5-point Calvinism. I think they're crazy. I think it's Looney Tunes. Hey, they've got a right to believe it. You got these Raelians, Scientology, you got all this stuff. I think they're crazy, but that's fine. They're practicing their freedom of belief. I'm not about to try to stop them, but this gets us back into that, another place where I really worry. His goal here, his end game, is to get rid of freedom of belief. We'll come back to this. We cannot even say that they are mistaken in religious terms because their knowledge of Scripture is generally unrivaled. What? No, it isn't. They totally cherry pick. That's part of the characterization of religious fundamentalists, is that they tend to cherry pick in Scripture. It's called proof texting. Look it up. So this is just like, where did he grow up? I mean, I really, at this point, I start to wonder, what bizarre, unique set of experiences did this guy have where he could even say these things, where these things could even come out of somebody's mouth? Because this is, I grew up in like 70s, 80s, 90s rural Midwest. And this was is utterly foreign to my experience there. So strange. So strange. Religious moderation is the product, he says, of secular knowledge and scriptural ignorance, and has no bona fides in religious terms to put on par with fundamentalism. Now, he really needs this, okay? So why is Sam Harris? Because I actually, after last episode's apoplexy, I sat down and I asked myself, why is it so important to him to spend so much time trying to convince the reader that the sort of moderate religious views are inauthentic? They're based on ignorance of the Scriptures themselves, based on, I don't know, this misplaced classical capital L liberalism view that people have freedom to believe and say whatever they want. Why does he want to disparage this so bad? Well, because he's in the business of caricature. He's not in the business of reasoning. He's not in the business of refutation. He's in the straw man business. And fundamentalists are straw men. Religious moderates are not straw men. So he needs to try to convince us that this middle view is can't be occupied with any integrity, because then he gets to go ahead and have the fun of tearing up his straw men like a young Labrador with a crappy chew toy. He wants to just go to town, but it's not working, because my religious moderation is not the product of secular knowledge, nor the product of scriptural ignorance. Quite the contrary. It is the result of scriptural knowledge. I have a more holistic picture of Scripture. I'm not cherry picking. And even if I'm wrong, or even if it's not the case, even if fundamentalists aren't doing that, sometimes the text simply underdetermines the theory. And so we have to look to other things to help us there. And I'm a person who has pretty damn detailed knowledge of Scripture, religious history, etc., and whose quote unquote secular knowledge, just extra biblical knowledge, has helped me understand the Scriptures. So it's not just that he's wrong. Okay, let's just be clear about this. It's not just that he's wrong. He's completely 180 degrees out of phase with reality. What he is calling black is white and white is black. The guy could not be more wrong. He's got it backwards. His statements are inversions of the truth. That's how bad it is here. But he needs this if he's going to go on to continue to caricature serious religious belief. If he's going to beat down his straw men, he's got to get rid of any other alternatives. Now, that was at the top of page 21. Now at the bottom of page 21, imagine that we could revive a well-educated Christian of the 14th century. The man would prove a total ignoramus. Now this is just, again, most people thought that I gave Sam exactly what he deserved, because he's an because he's spewing hate, and it's based on ignorance. I once heard a funny, like, a redneck call a guy, I loved this, an ignorant. Like, he's like, oh, that guy, he's just an ignorant. It's kind of like the redneck version of ignoramus. Well, guess what? I'm sorry. Sam Harris is a total ignoramus. You got that? Sam Harris is a total ignoramus because the root word there is ignorance. Ignorance. And in this case, the root word is ignore, because his ignorance isn't excusable. It's culpable ignorance. Sam Harris is culpably ignorant because he has the intelligence and affluence to have done the research, to have had citations, to have given examples of people that hold these, alleged views. But instead, he chose to ignore all facts and evidence about religious believers and is in a state of self-imposed ignorance. So it's not the case that, what, he is, the 14th century man is rubber, Sam Harris is glue. What he says of him, bounced back and stuck on him. The man would prove to be a total ignoramus, except in matters of faith. His beliefs about geography, astronomy, and medicine would all embarrass even a child. What? First of all, geography, the geography's probably changed a little bit since the 1300s. So yeah, he's not gonna, be able to identify, Czechoslovakia on a map. Of course, there again, there is no Czechoslovakia on a map, because guess what? I'm from the olden days when there was, the Czech Republic and whatever the heck the other half of it is, Slovakia, I guess. Czech Republic. In my day, it was Czechoslovakia. It was one thing. It's where all the hockey pucks were made. All the hockey pucks were made in Czechoslovakia. But then, I went and did a tour of Prague and lectured there, and I'm in the Czech Republic. Okay, what would have been in my childhood Czechoslovakia. You got Bosnia-Herzegovina. You've got the USSR. Geography changes, man. So I don't even know what he's talking about there. And I'll bet you, if we think about actual fixed geography, the man from the 14th century would know more than Sam Harris does. Astronomy, again, what are you talking about? You talking about an actual understanding of what constellations are where and how to use those? A man from the 14th century might be able to navigate a ship at sea by the stars. You think a child could do that? You think Sam Harris could do that? Again, ancient and medieval and early modern man's knowledge of the workings of nature far exceeded the average modern person's. Their knowledge of fundamentals of life and death, the role of sex in the life cycle, all of these things, even like home remedies and things like that. Modern science is wonderful. I love it when it works, but there's a ton of things for which it doesn't, mostly in the health and wellness things. Medical science is awesome because it can pull life out of death. But on the daily, like, health and wellness things, there's a lot of old naturopathy or whatever you call them, methods that are actually really good. And the average person from the 14th century might have been better at treating a host of daily ailments than maybe even Sam Harris's general practitioner. It just is obviously not the case. Would embarrass even a child, but he would know more or less everything there is to know about God. Well, that's probably not true either. Though he would be considered a fool to think the earth the center of the cosmos, well, no more so than somebody who thought it was the sun or the Milky Way. What about the person who thinks there is a center of the cosmos? That's a complex question. It's a complex question what the center of the cosmos is. And why shouldn't the man of the 14th century think the earth was the center of the cosmos? It looks that way. He didn't have very good evidence that it wasn't the case. Geocentrism covered the data for the most part. And so I always thought it was kind of stupid to go back then and project, ignorance onto a belief that made sense then, just because we know better now, but through ways that weren't available to him. So I don't. This is pointless because merely being wrong does not make one ignorant or irrational. Okay, it doesn't make somebody stupid, which is the implication here, not just pure ignorance, but in the sense of lacking information. But clearly, he's portraying late medieval man as just stupid. Or it'd be a fool to think the Earth is the center of the cosmos, or that trepanning constitutes a wise medical intervention. Well, what's trepanning? It's when you drill a hole in the skull. Hey, that was actually big in the 20th century, or especially early 20th century in Europe. There was a movement of trepanning. Trepanation was seen as a method of intellectual stimulation because it would stimulate blood flow to the brain, the cranium, and Paul McCartney tells a story about how John Lennon, he was having dinner with John Lennon, I think with Yoko, but it might have been somebody else. And John Lennon's like, hey, you want to go get trepanation? And Paul's like, when? He's like, I don't know, just like, we can go get it done. So it's not like that's absent from modern man either. And he offers no evidence that it was more common then than it is now. He also doesn't offer any evidence that it wasn't wise medical intervention in certain circumstances. Okay. And it's not that difficult I haven't done it in a long time, but I did it once upon a time. It's not that difficult to find articles online, credible articles online that show that, given their options at the time, there are certain medical conditions such that the wisest option available to them would have been to drill a hole in the skull. Yeah. It could, if there was intracranial bleeding, it might have been better than whatever the other options were, waiting it out. And the calcification on the skulls of these people who underwent trepanation shows that they lived after it's not like it killed them. So they lived through it, and it if their life was in jeopardy through some sort of cranial impact and internal bleeding or internal bleeding or hydrocephalus or something, he offers no evidence whatsoever that it wasn't the right thing to do for a lot of people in these circumstances. He says there are two explanations for this. Then he's really unclear about his pronouns. Either we perfected our religious understanding of the world a millennia ago, while our knowledge on all other fronts was still hopelessly inchoate. I actually stumped a national spelling bee live on the radio by asking him to spell inchoate. It's one of my favorite words. Or religion, being the mere maintenance of dogma, is the one area of discourse that does not admit of progress. This is such an old trope. The idea that theology is irrational because it doesn't evolve, whereas science does evolve. Well, actually, the evolution of science is in certain ways encouraging, but it also gives rise to what's called the pessimistic induction. The pessimistic induction. And the pessimistic induction is the view that, every time we have a scientific theory that we think has got it right, guess what? We've discovered about it. It wasn't right. And if you just do standard enumerative induction, then guess what that says about your current scientific views? Probably false. And if you take the Thomas Kuhn route, the structure of scientific revolutions, it's not even like we're necessarily honing in and making progress. It's we're having wholesale replacements of old theories. So this talk about the evolution of science and progress is kind of a double-edged sword. So I'd love to see what Sam Harris has to say about the pessimistic induction. But so he goes on, with each passing year, do our religious beliefs conserve more and more data of human experience? If religion addresses a genuine sphere of understanding and human necessity, then it should be susceptible to progress. Why think that? Why think that? Look at what about ancient history? Ancient history is a genuine sphere of understanding, but it wouldn't have to progress to be such. Maybe we've got all the data we need on it. maybe everything that's going to be unearthed has been unearthed. Maybe there's not going to be any new evidence with respect to ancient history. And also with respect to morality. I mean, frankly, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics pretty much nails it. The basics of virtue ethics have also not changed dramatically. There's all sorts of nuances and interesting puzzles and questions, and there have been interesting advances in virtue ethics, and there are different interpretations and options. I've published on that myself. It's something that is of interest to me. Nevertheless, most virtue ethicists today, thoroughly modern and often secular people, think, yeah, Aristotle pretty much nailed it for what he said. And so there's not been, progress there like there has been in science in terms of like these radical leaps. But that doesn't reflect negatively on Aristotle's ethics. This is a ridiculous argument. The argument is something like, well, I mean, it's almost spelled out here in detail. If it's a genuine sphere of human understanding, then it should be susceptible to progress. Religion isn't susceptible to progress, therefore it isn't a genuine sphere of understanding. So it's simple modus tollens argument, but it's totally fallacious. It's shown to be fallacious by two counterexamples. The fact that it would rule out ancient history as a sphere of human understanding, and it would rule out virtue ethics as a sphere of human understanding. Now, you may not think virtue ethics is like the correct ethics. You may not think that it's the whole of ethics, but it isn't refuted in virtue of not progressing. That's absolute nonsense. Also, suppose you got this idea of a gut, the grand unified theory. Suppose that an advanced alien species comes upon the Earth and just delivers us the gut. They've been around for like millions and millions and millions of years, more than we have. They've figured it out. They've got the grand unified theory, and they give it to us. Well, then a couple thousand years go by, and Sam Harris the 30th says, physics isn't a genuine sphere of human understanding because it doesn't progress. It hasn't progressed. There hasn't been any major new physics in 300 years. Like, yeah, right. It's because it's solved, because we got it, because we got the grand unified theory. We figured it out. So his method of reasoning here would make it impossible to ever rest in like truth. So come on, man. This is ridiculous. Okay, so we're at 25 and a half minutes, and we've got one paragraph left in this section of chapter 1. So we will continue with that and then call it a podcast. So, moderates, he says, do not want to kill anybody in the name of God, but they do want us to keep using the word God as though we knew what we were talking about. Why does he go metalinguistic? It's like maybe he doesn't want us to be allowed to use the word God. Maybe he doesn't want us to talk about God. And I do know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about God. You can fix the reference of an object without having exhaustive knowledge of it. And they do not want anything too critical said about people who really believe in the God of their fathers, because tolerance, perhaps above all else, is sacred. Again, oh my goodness, where are these people? Where are the people who think that tolerance means not criticizing? I'll tell you, the only place I know where they are on the left, politically speaking. But I don't know anybody who says that you can't criticize people's genuine religious beliefs. I don't know anybody. I've never seen anybody say that. I've never read it. I've never heard it. Give me something to go on here, Sam. And again, he says moderates. He doesn't say, okay, there's 3 kinds of religious moderates. And again, guys, when you're reading somebody and they're painting with such a broad brush, you've got to think to yourself, wait a second, is the world really this black and white? Is the world of religious moderation just this single homogeneous thing within which there are no fine distinctions? There's not even 2 types of religious moderate? Unlikely. So he's speaking for all moderates here, and he doesn't give any examples. Not one quote. He doesn't even name a single person as a token religious moderate. He just says moderates don't want anything too critical said about people who really believe in God. He's just making it up. That's why I get so triggered about this stinking book. Sorry, kids. Hopefully you can handle hearing stinking. Because he's making it up. He's making it up. To speak plainly, yeah. Unlike so far in this book. Speak plainly, Sam. Oh, Sam Harris, please quit hiding behind the bush. Tell me what you really think. Speak plainly to me, Sam. Sorry, I got a little away from the microphone there if you're listening on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts, but I was shouting at the camera, so hopefully you could still hear it. To speak plainly and truthfully, well, yeah, that would be a change as well, about the state of the world. To say, for instance, that the Bible and the Quran both contain mountains of life-destroying gibberish is antithetical to tolerance, as moderates currently conceive it. No, it's not. Guess what, Sam? Wrong. Tolerance is saying that people get to believe and talk about their gibberish, and that that's okay. And tolerance is saying it's okay to call it gibberish. It's okay to believe the gibberish. It's okay to talk the gibberish, and it's okay to call the gibberish gibberish. Now, there is a bit of a problem here by calling it gibberish, because gibberish is unintelligible. Gibberish has no meaning. The word gibber is onomatopoeia. Just like the word barbarian in Greek is barbaros, because that's what barbarians sound like. Bara, 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 bara. And it's the same with gibberish. It is the same root as jibber jabber, because people who spoke a foreign language, it was jibber jabber, jibber jabber, jibber jabber, jibber jabber. They couldn't make any sense of it. Okay. So gibberish is speech that has no semantic value. It's gobbledygook. It's jabberwocky. It doesn't have meaning. So how it could be both literally meaningless and life destroying, I just don't know. He's not using his words. I'm sorry. Somebody said I was being pedantic for correcting his punctuation and some of his word usage. But look, he acts like he's all that. He's allowed himself to be put on some sort of intellectual throne on the intellectual dark web. Sometimes I call it the intellectual dirt web. Actually, there's some good stuff on there, like Jordan Peterson. But other than that, it's pretty worthless and pretentious. So yeah, he's one of these intellectual dumb web people who is supposed to be smart. Well, I'm sorry. He doesn't use words right. Not my fault. I'm going to call it when I see it. I'm sure there's going to be like videos. If I use one word wrong ever, is going to be like on a video. But guess what? I'm doing this unscripted, off the cuff. He had the opportunity to edit this. Okay. In a way, yeah, I'm going to listen to this video, but it's hard to edit your own. I guess I'll edit it. I don't know. I may or may not listen to this. But at any rate, this is off the cuff, on the fly, making it up as I go. And when you write a book, and have a publisher, you should really be more careful about your word choice. It is antithetical to tolerance, as moderates currently conceive it, but we can no longer afford the luxury of such political correctness. Well, I'm not a fan of political correctness myself, but what is political correctness in this context as he uses the word? Well, it is that we are going to allow people to use the word God as though they knew what they were talking about. And maybe he means we can no longer afford to not criticize religious views. Well, it's ridiculous. People do it all the time. We must finally recognize the price we were paying to maintain the iconography of our ignorance. Because that's just words. That's just like fancy sound words. Okay. So that brings to a close the section of chapter 1 called The Myth of Moderation in Religion. It was a straw man argument. It was unsupported by citations or examples. And the rhetoric involved is simply to maintain a structure that allows him to do straw man arguments left and right. So we will pick up in episode 3 with The Shadow of the Past, where we learn that every religion preaches the truth of propositions for which it has no evidence. I can't wait to get into that. But that's next time on episode 3. For right now, peace out. Catch you later.